Hi, my name is Lauren Wilde. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm registered with the BACP, generally specializing in complex trauma and anxiety and depression. I'm also a fairly experienced Dungeons and Dragons player and dungeon master. I've DM'd more than I've played. And my presentation this morning is called Make a Wisdom Saving Throw, Exploring What Makes D&D Therapeutic. This is based on my master's dissertation that was completed in 2021 through Staffordshire University and supervised by Dr. Daniel Heron. It's currently in the process of being edited, hopefully to be submitted to publication, hopefully to Game Therapy UK's journal. But to get started, this research was inspired by my own lived experience of playing D&D. I began playing pretty early on in the COVID-19 lockdowns while I was finishing my qualifications to become a psychotherapist. I had really wanted to play since high school, but I really struggled to find a group of people that could do it. And growing up in the deep South in America, absolutely this was affected by the Satanic Panic holdovers and was kind of a hopeless dream for a long time. I had some friends that I knew played, and we had talked before the pandemic, like, oh, we should try to do it. But of course, scheduling being the true big bad always got in the way. But then COVID happened, and we all went from being very busy people to being not very busy people. I noticed two things really early on. The first was that I noticed that I was feeling better after our game of D&D than I was after my regular therapy sessions with my own therapist. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. The second was that, like any self-respecting nerd, once I started playing D&D, I immediately joined subreddits about D&D. And I noticed that there were a significant amount of jokes and memes about D&D being used as a replacement for therapy, which was obviously really interesting to me as a therapist. And then as I was kind of thinking about this and reflecting on why this might be, I started noticing certain overlaps with group therapy work and theory. And I thought, well, this is worth investigating. And I've got a master's coming up next year and research here coming up. So this will be what I do. My research objectives were centering on understanding the various aspects of how players perceive their games to affect themselves and each other. This ended up being narrowed down to perceptions of overlap between themselves and their characters, the way relationships in the group functioned or changed, and how they understood the way that the group was working together to make decisions. Initially, when I started the literature review for this project, it was really difficult to find good modern literature on D&D phenomena, particularly for adults. There was more available for young adults and teens, but for anyone over the age of 25, I really struggled to find much of anything. Most literature that was written contemporaneously with D&D's initial kind of strong cultural emergence in the 80s and early 90s was very much affected by bias due to the prevalence of that Satanic Panic. This ended up meaning, from what I was finding when I was reading through, I noticed a significant amount of bias in the way the research was approached. A lot of times the research being approached kind of specifically assuming that the people who are playing D&D are socially maladjusted, misanthropic men. This has led to kind of a persistent stigma in a lot of circles, particularly in social work, I found, with those same assumptions still being made. But eventually, with the rise of actual play Twitch streams like Critical Role, Dimension 20, and combined with the popularity of Stranger Things on Netflix, D&D began to rise to prominence again, particularly during the lockdowns, which is when I started to play. I think that this is likely because D&D is one of the few games that can offer a clear structure and social interaction and imaginative play during a time when we weren't able to really do any of those things very easily. And it doesn't really require anything more than dice and a pencil. And to be honest, on computers, you don't even really need that. But all of that combined to make it really easy to play over the online video chat platforms. But it is worth mentioning two particularly relevant papers that were written during the Satanic Panic. First, in W.D. Blackman's 1994 paper on his patient Fred. Fred was in his early 20s. He was extremely resistant to sharing anything about himself in his mandated therapy sessions. However, he was willing to talk about his D&D character's backstory and adventures and those struggles for this fictional character. And Blackman was finding that actually by letting Fred engage in that emotional displacement of just putting all of his emotions into this character and talking about his character as though it's a separate person, he was actually finding that he was learning more and more about Fred as a person. And by also allowing him to practice analyzing those emotions of his character in that safe, distance way, eventually Fred was able to take ownership over his own experiences and his own emotions. And then similarly, in Hughes's 1988 paper, he had a subject named Mallory who was exploring her feelings around her gender and her socioeconomic background, and those expectations she felt were placed on her as a result. When she started playing her game, which was actually Call of Cthulhu, she decided that she was going to choose an aristocratic male character who didn't care about anybody other than himself, and just see what that was like for her to play and to just step away completely from what she was perceiving as the restrictions placed on her by femininity and a low socioeconomic background. She found that as she was experimenting with this, these aspects were not being punished in the world that she and her gaming group were co-creating. And it ultimately ended up feeling freeing to start giving this male character more feminine aspects, like starting to care about how his friends were feeling and care about kind of emotional aspects of what was happening in the game. And as this was going on and kind of feeding off of each other, where she was trying out these other aspects of femininity, but not through her expected, like her normal everyday lens, this group was encouraging her and helping her to work out for herself what it means to be feminine. And she ended up feeling ultimately much freer, and ultimately was really therapeutic in her understanding of how the effect of gender on a person's experience of the world is affecting things, both in a game and out of a game. In Sargent's 2014 thesis, the author was positing that players will unconsciously play out their own difficult thematic content. This was really key in my research because I was really particularly interested in this, having noticed it myself in the character that I was making when I was feeling very overwhelmed, very much incapable of coping with everything that was going on in the world and in my life. And I had noticed that I myself, who am a very warm and empathic and caring person who sits and thinks about things, and I just made a barbarian that was killing first and asking questions never. So I was really interested in kind of that thesis and wanting to explore those questions a little bit more. And in fact, actually that statement of players playing out their own stuff, whether they mean to or not, did come up in my own independent research, but I'll talk about that in a minute. And I think finally in Adams's 2013 paper, which was centered on communications research, it was pointing out that although everything that's occurring in game is essentially a construct to enable gameplay, the effects of the construct are still real. Players are still experiencing complex relationships. They're experiencing multiple layers of feeling and emotion, both individually and together as a group. They're working together to accomplish goals that are both individual and also group-based. And these are almost identical to the results that are found in effective group therapy. Everything occurring within gameplay is continuous communication. It will often hold layers of meaning. So, for example, a character might be about to do something really incredibly stupid. The player knows this and acknowledges this to the group and says, sorry guys, but this is what my character is going to do. The players are aware, but their characters may not have any idea of the impending chaos about to completely consume the party. And then finally, I think a phrase that really stood out to me a lot and was constantly on my mind during the research was a phrase that Blackman's 1994 paper coined, battling psychic dragons in mental dungeons. And yes, this absolutely sounds like a fantastic idea for a one-shot, go for it. But in discussing kind of the value of fantasy, I think it was really important for me when I was considering how I wanted to conduct the research, to keep in mind everyone is battling some kind of psychic dragon or other, and just because they're in our heads isn't making it less formidable, it's making it more formidable, if anything. But I think one of the values of D&D that I was finding through the literature review and in reflecting on my own experience as well was that actually these psychic dragons don't need to be battled alone. The players can connect with one another, and we can work together and form friendships and explore these mental dungeons, and ultimately learn how to rely on each other and themselves, and hopefully defeat these kind of personal monsters, really, that we all feel like we battle at some point or another. So the way I did this was I used interpretative phenomenological analysis. IPA is less focused on getting a broad range of participants and more like going very deep with a very small, ideally pretty homogenous group of people. It was really particularly well suited to my research objectives of trying to understand how players were understanding and interpreting their experiences of D&D. And it was also really reassuring. This was my first major research project, and IPA is really thoroughly structured and very well defined. And that felt like the right choice for me with the first kind of big research project. But I also did feel at home with IPA's kind of defined philosophy, which is that to be human means that we are relational, we are interdependent. We're all operating out of our own interpretations of what it means to be human, what it means to experience things. But these interpretations are also constantly being affected and affecting other people's interpretations of those shared events. And IPA just then brings that personal awareness into the research. So participants were recruited opportunistically through some local gaming groups that I was in, that I was kind of known and trusted within that community. I sent out a poster after receiving permission from group admins. Once interest was expressed, Qualtrics link was given, which had all the information and ethics and all that stuff. And I invited participants to fill out a basic survey, allowing them to self-define their own pseudonym, their gender, and their ethnicity. So just in blank boxes, they could decide how they wanted to describe themselves instead of me prescribing that to them. And they were choosing from various age groupings. I was really pleased that in a field where a lot of the research skews masculine, that I had kind of an even distribution of men and women, and that I was able to kind of get those like older age ranges instead of it being focused so much on adolescence and early adulthood, because that was particularly what I was really interested in. In terms of requirements as well that were instituted, I required that each person who applied had played D&D for at least 6 months, because I thought this was probably about a good length of time. If they were only playing D&D once a month, it still gave them 6 sessions of experiencing this, but if they were playing it more than once a month, they would have more experience at least. And I thought that this would be valuable in terms of it gives people plenty of time to experience what it's like to play a character, what it's like to have those layers of decision making, the layers of role playing, of storytelling, and all of that. And then obviously as well need to be over 18, as I wanted to focus on the adult experience. The interviews were semi-structured, informed by a topic guide, which developed partly out of the existing research about how general gaming affects mental health, partly from the literature review, which was picking up on various things that could do with being explored deeper, and partly out of my own experience, which was informed by my own reflections on what I had found therapeutic. This was also covered kind of with my supervisor, who had absolutely no idea anything about D&D whatsoever, and so he was able to kind of keep me from getting too far into a nerd's manifesto rather than a master's dissertation. So the questions ended up being framed primarily around elements of catharsis, how a group connects and bonds, how players are self-reflecting and making choices. So my findings, overall results were indicating that players generally experience a number of therapeutic effects as a result of playing D&D. I boiled these down to the superordinate themes of confidence, creativity, relational development, personal catharsis, all of which were found in gameplay and extended into the players' personal lives. An increase in confidence was a theme that was developed directly out of participants' own words. One participant saying, quote, "Since playing D&D, I think I've become a bit more brave in stepping out there and doing things I wouldn't normally do. And I think it could be down to having been playing a brave character in the sessions, and it's kind of having an effect on me. And in fact, all 4 participants expressed similar sentiments, which seemed really significant to me. Each of them, of the 4 participants as well, 3 of them spoke specifically about D&D helping to lessen their feelings of social anxiety. These 3 people all identified struggling with social skills as a significant problem they struggled with. I think that this is partly due to the structure of a D&D group. So at any game, people will arrive, they'll sort out themselves something to eat or drink, unpack their dice, remind themselves what happened at the last game, get out character sheets, look at the DM to start them off. And this routine, with a few minor variations, has been true of every game I've ever been a part of, every game that I've seen. And I think that when it comes to people who are struggling with social anxiety, having that defined structure of knowing what you're expecting is really helpful in being able to eventually just relax. It's not you're not getting sucked in kind of unpredictable casual conversation until after you've managed to sort of just relax, get in, you've sorted out your stuff, and you're ready to go. The theme of creativity was woven through all the responses, whether it was centered around creative spell use, creative and unexpected problem solving, collaborative storytelling. A group of people are presented with a D&D encounter, whether it's a combat or a puzzle or a diplomacy challenge. No 2 people are going to make the same choices for the same reason. And the research found that although it could sometimes be frustrating, generally speaking, the players and DMs enjoyed surprising each other and themselves. Relational development as a theme particularly centered around communication and the potential for conflict, where I had expected that gaming groups would be relatively homogenous with regards to opinions. I found actually the data did not indicate this. In fact, Anne said, actually, with both parties I play with, I think after playing D&D for a while, we all got more comfortable sharing our opinions that didn't necessarily match each other's. The game gives you a bit of a protective layer. The story is going to go on, and I think that then teaches you how to solve that disagreement in real life too. And finally, with the theme of personal catharsis, participants illustrated throughout the interviews that D&D can be a way to release or reframe particular experiences that a player feels ambivalent about. Particularly interesting to me was Anne's decision to play a male character, an annoying, loudmouth rich kid who she felt was very different, almost exactly the opposite to her, having always been a quiet, bookish girl from a working class background. As she noted in her interview, choosing a male character, quote, gives me permission to be a little bit more uppity. And I guess there's an underlying feeling that girls can't get away with being unlikable as much as boys can, end quote. Having the space to kind of experiment with the greater social freedoms men have allowed Anne to put aside the burden of feeling that she had to conform to social expectations of women, namely for her that women will prioritize the feelings of others and make the effort to be liked. And then more generally, in regards to catharsis, AM92 gave an excellent example when she said, quote, I think that a lot of things in D&D, whether you know it or not, are reflecting real life. Even though you might think, how can it, because I'm stood here fighting a giant in the middle of the forest, actually the decisions you make and the way you react to things, really you're reflecting your real life. And sometimes real life can feel like you're about to be eaten by a giant, can't it? And it can feel like you've got your head underwater and you're drowning and you just need someone to pull you out. So what does it mean? One of the ways that in which I've understood the results of this research has been that D&D can give players space to escape from their everyday life, and that having that space is what is allowing players to naturally bring in whatever emotional material has really been on their mind. Players notice various overlaps with their characters, whether it was about processing emotional material or previously unexplored aspects of personalities, feeling the effects of their characters' growth in their lives outside the game. Having given the players a metaphorical sandbox wherein the story is created by them, meaning is assigned freely by them, the players are then free to understand themselves more as that trust is built within the group. And I think further to an extent, all of these themes are interdependent on one another. The relationships are strengthened because of the trust that's developed, and this allows players to explore these deeper parts of themselves. And as that material is processed within the game, players are then feeling more capable to take what they're learning about themselves into their out-of-game life. And this pattern, again, really similar to patterns that are noted in effective group therapy, particularly group therapy that's been developed by Irvin Yalom. I think as well, uniquely about D&D, or any other tabletop role-playing game, it's allowing for kind of immediate social feedback on an individual's behavior or outlook or plans, but it still allows that safe emotional distance due to mutual emotional displacement. And I think this is lessening the pressure to kind of get it right the first time socially. And I think that this might be the aspect of D&D which is most alleviating social anxiety. But another reason why this might occur is just the simple fact that each person at the table is approaching as equals. There may be some with more D&D knowledge or experience, but there's nobody who's fought a dragon in real life at the table. And furthermore, each D&D class is explicitly given tools to work with. So a wizard has got fireball and smarts, and a paladin has got a sword and charm, and each character is going to look at a different situation and see entirely different options. Here, each player will recognize, on some level at least, that every single other player is looking at a totally different tool set. And just like in real life, you can choose to work together or you can choose to insist on your own way. But both of those options, either of those options, require multiple levels of communication. You're having a meta conversation and you're having an in-game conversation. You're negotiating plans both in character and out of character. You're risking conflict both in and out of the game. And so I think, although maybe the stereotype of D&D players for a long time has been that socially maladjusted misanthrope, I think actually far from being an antisocial hobby, D&D interactions require really complex social navigation, and it's still the whole time offering that safe emotional distance. So finally, I guess to just sort of like sum up everything here, and my final thoughts on it. My data confirmed that players will bring in emotional material and they will explore it in the game whether they intended to or not. Given that this is occurring without any direct input from a mental health professional, there exists an implication, I think, that having a mental health professional either involved in or running a game of D&D could prove to be very therapeutic, just in the sense of therapists are trained to handle complex emotions. They are trained to hold the feelings of even multiple people in the room if they've had the training on running groups. And every DM, I'm sure, can relate to the experience of sitting there being like, oh, this person's crying and I don't know what happened and how to fix that. And I think that a therapist either running the game or training people on how to handle those situations could be really therapeutic for people. I think ultimately, for me, my final kind of reflections on this was that playing D&D is it's not like playing a board game where progress is linear and the goal is always the same. The world of a D&D game is as big as the players and the DM want to make it. The decisions are as morally gray as the players see them. Players can feel like heroes and explore weakness and experience very real feelings and resulting relationships with each other. They can face situations they never expected and yet also be reminded of something that they are dealing with in real life. And I think really valuably for me, anybody can imagine themselves battling a dragon alone, but D&D means that the players are entering into a collective imagination. They're imagining themselves with their adventuring party, made up of their friends, forgetting whatever mental dungeons they may feel stuck in, and they're creating a new story together. So